Hello and welcome back to the channel. So, believe it or not, there was a time not too long ago when I heavily downplayed the importance of story. That's no longer the case. So, I guess to preface this topic, I'd like to talk just a little bit about story itself and the roots of story. Now, I'll hear things like story is the primary human activity. I'll also hear language like humans are natural storytellers. We have this innate sense of storytelling and the ability to craft and narrate events. And I got to thinking, what exactly does that mean? Humans are innate storytellers. Now, we can imagine way long ago, hunter gatherers, you know, maybe a couple of them go on a hunt for some meat, and when they return after a long day of hunting, the rest of their people ask them what happened, and they're going to relate the events. And, maybe during that day, they crossed a grove of pine trees, and maybe one of them stubbed their toe, and they also encountered a hailstorm. So, if they're going to talk about what happened during the day, if they're going to tell the story of the day, they're going to select certain things. So they might skip that bit about the pine trees. They might skip that detail about stubbing their toe on a rock. But they probably will talk about the hailstorm. So you can just imagine, that's maybe how stories were born. It's just these tribes kind of telling the events of the day, but also being able to pick and choose. But let's go even before that and just talk about, just the instinct for telling a story, and how it is that humans know how to pick and choose events, as pick and choose what to include in the story. Um, and this is just me kind of surmising, but I think there are instances in our everyday lives where we are faced with a situation and we have to kind of tell a story to ourselves about that situation in order to deal with the situation. So, an example I like to use is, let's say there's a big snowstorm and you're stuck in your house, you can't leave, all the power's out, you have hardly any food, there's no hot water, and it's just a pretty awful situation. You have enough food to get by, you're going to survive, but it's very uncomfortable. It's not what you're used to. So you have to decide at some point, how am I going to deal with this? And you can either be extremely pessimistic about the situation and just focus on everything that is horrible about this event, and that will sort of coat your perspective, and you'll come away talking about it as this awful event that was entirely negative. Or you could change your perspective and just think about, okay, what are the positive takeaways from this? How can I change this and turn this into a memorable experience? How can I make the best of the situation? This is something we do all the time. And I think that is tied to storytelling and our ability to select the details, to pick the things that we want to focus on. So when we're stuck in the house during that snowstorm without any power, we pick and choose what to actually focus on, and that dictates our mood, and that dictates how we're going to remember that experience. That sort of human ability, I think, is very much tied to the human ability to tell stories. Because just as we are able to pick and choose during those real life scenarios, when we're telling a story, we pick and choose the details. We pick and choose the right ones to give the story a tone, to give it a feel. We might pick just the most exciting details, or we might pick more mundane details if we're going for something more realistic. And it's that ability to pick and choose that I think is what makes us innate storytellers. And that's why we're so good at it. It's not just our ability to come home from a hunt and tell our people this is what happened. It's our ability to take any experience in our everyday lives and coat it with a certain feeling and perspective that will dictate how we experience that in the moment and also how we remember it. So then from there, let's get into the real heart of today's topic, which is story important? And why did I used to think that story wasn't important? All right, so story is absolutely important. It's crucial for the reasons that I just kind of laid out. I think it is a human activity and it's an essential element of how we live and structure our lives. So then once we accept that, then we can really start getting into the nitty-gritty details of what story actually is. And a really common question you'll encounter is, what's the difference between story and plot? Now, this can get a little bit muddled. You'll hear a lot of different definitions about what story is versus what plot is. What I understand it to mean is that story is everything that happens in an event. So from A to B, it is every single event that transpires. Or if you think about your life, the story of your life is every single thing that has happened, literally, since you were born until now. The plot is then the individual moments that you highlight and the moments that you're going to focus on. So if you're going to tell the story of your life, you're not going to tell literally every single thing. You're going to pick and choose the most significant parts of your life or the ones that you want to focus on. And that is your ability to kind of plot out your life in a way and create a plot of the story of your life. So that's how I understand it to be. And E.M. Forster, I think, has that famous quote where he says, a story is the king died and the queen died. But then if you change that to the king died and the queen died of a broken heart, that's suddenly a plot. So there's other people who will define it as something else. I'll talk about story is the theme, or story is what the overarching idea of the plot is. I think that kind of complicates things unnecessarily. I think it's easier to think of story as just everything that happens. It's all the events, and then plot is our ability to pick and choose from those events to make the most compelling narrative, which brings us to the next word, which is what is a narrative. And narrative, I think, is everything within a story. So it's the plot, it's the ideas, it's the characters, it's the themes, it's everything that you put into a story to make it something powerful. Suddenly that's the narrative. That is the overarching, the grand sense of story is what narrative is. So you could say it starts with story, and then from story you get plot, and then from plot you get narrative. I think it's a little bit of a semantics game because we do have different definitions for these things, and I think if we're going with my definition, then rather than saying humans are innate storytellers, we're more innate plotters. But saying storyteller, I think, just sounds better. So again, it's kind of just a semantics game. I don't think it's that important. You don't really need to emphasize these terms too much, as long as we kind of understand the mechanics of what's actually going on and how to actually go about crafting a compelling narrative. So a couple years ago, I actually downplayed the importance of all of this. I really did believe that character was the most important thing, and that you could really kind of discard story and just have a really great character study, a character piece. Now that's true in certain mediums. I think film, which I was extremely into at the time, I think film allows for a disregard of story in a way that fiction does not. Because film has the visuals, it has cinematography, it's got music. Film can get away with being boring in a way fiction can't, because it has these other components to it. And unless you happen to just be an absolute stunning writer who writes the most incredible prose that's so mind-boggling and mind-blowing that that's all you kind of read it for, is just for the prose, then I don't think you can do that if you're writing fiction. With fiction, you need to think about story. And I came to this realization because I realized that as I was writing various stories, I had compelling characters, at least that I thought were compelling. And I had characters that I wanted to explore and that kind of meant something to me. But they were within this story that was kind of empty and not very interesting. And I realized that I think of myself as an entertainer first and foremost. As a writer, I'm trying to ideally entertain readers, and then hopefully from there, maybe other things can come out of that. But first and foremost, I think of myself as an entertainer. So if I think of myself as an entertainer, then of course I better have an entertaining story. I can't just have compelling characters. And I have to have a good hook. I have to have events that happen that really pull the reader in, and I have to build momentum with these events. Basically, the realization that I came to, and this is probably obvious for a lot of uh, more experienced fiction writers, but for someone who is kind of more embedded in the film world, I mean, this is really kind of a big discovery for me, is just realizing how complementary story and character are with each other. That having a really compelling character can feed the story, and vice versa. And that was such a big discovery for me, and it really made me realize that it's still a priority to have really compelling characters, but you reveal the complexity through the plot, through the events, through the action. And the way you entertain your reader is by giving them a story that is really engaging, and a story where you do want to know what happens next. But through these events, through these actions, you are revealing characters of real complexity. Now, all of this is just my perspective, and you're definitely welcome to disagree. And there definitely are books out there that really just focus on the characters, and there's not much of a plot, and they can be really powerful. But this is just, for me as a writer, this is kind of what I've concluded, and this is what I value as a writer, and what I think is important for me. People ask me, do you write more literary fiction or do you write genre fiction? Ideally, I try not to put a label on what I write. I don't want it to be considered just literary fiction, but I also don't want it to be labeled genre fiction. So maybe it has elements of both, but really it's more just I need to ask myself questions. I've got a good character, but I have to ask myself, how's the story going? How are the events in the story? Are they compelling? Are they interesting? And does it move well? Is there a good hook? And these are the things that I'm thinking about. I'm not thinking about, oh, am I writing literary fiction? Am I writing genre fiction? What genre am I writing in? I kind of am trying to move past all of that and just focus on, what is the story? And then if the story's good, then through that, I can hopefully make the characters come alive and provide an entertaining, memorable experience. And that's all I can really hope for. That's all I can really strive for right now as a writer. That's what makes sense to me. And I think it's important to have these things in mind, because if you don't, you can get stuck writing really, really boring things with really compelling characters. And really compelling characters are not enough. You need to have a good story with interesting things, compelling things that happen. Again, this is something that for some people is probably so blatantly obvious that they're like, why are you talking about this? But I know there's people out there like myself who don't quite understand the importance of story because they're so preoccupied with character. And I'm just trying to say with this video that focus on both. They are complementary, and it will make your work better in the long run. Unless you happen to be, again, like I said, that genius wordsmith who can write the most dazzling prose that you can do whatever the hell you want. You don't have to think about story. You don't have to think about character. You can just write stuff that blows people's minds because the writing is so good. But I don't know many people like that, so we have to find these other ways to make our work memorable and stand out. Anyway, feel free to disagree with any of this. This is just my musings on what it means to tell a story, the difference between plot, the difference between character, what plot, narrative, and story have in common, don't have in common. It's just me sort of musing about all of this stuff because I think it is very fun to think about and it makes my writing ultimately better. And again, I'm on a journey as a writer. I'm still growing. I'm figuring out what type of writer I am, and asking these questions is all part of that journey. So anyway, that's all I've got for today. I really appreciate you watching this, and if you haven't subscribed to the channel, please do so, and also give the video a thumbs up. And well, that's pretty much it. So we'll see you next time.